have fun.
It is just about 4 o'clock Eastern time. So welcome everyone from wherever you are viewing in from to this live Zoominar.
Wait, I have 2 cousins now. Hi, Lena.
That's great.
I have a lot of cousins, so this could go on and on.
So just thank you everybody for joining us. This is our 4th in this series of Meet the Miniaturist. It's a great way for us to sort of get together, connect virtually, get to learn about some of the other miniaturists in the world who are out there. And one in particular, Louise Krasniewicz, I'm so thrilled to have with us today. I've known Louise for about 5 years now. You know, she's an author, she's an educator, and she's an amazing miniaturist. And she's done several pieces for my gallery. And she was in a couple of exhibitions, and we also had one of her most, I think, well-known pieces, I think, in the miniatures world, Rear Window, which we're going to talk about, on display for a while, which was a great privilege to have in the gallery. And so we're going to get to meet Louise today. And I just, you know, what I love most about Louise is she's an amazing miniaturist, but she has a way of thinking about miniaturists and a way of teaching us about miniatures, because she thinks a lot about them and she's created theories behind them. And we're going to get to hear some of those theories behind miniatures, why we love them, why we're so compelled to either create them, what just a higher meaning to them than I think we're all accustomed to. So thank you for joining us today, Louise. So glad that you're here with us and that the community at large gets to meet you. And so with that, thank you for joining today. I think one of the questions is that I have for you is, why miniatures? How? What was your first interaction with them? Why do you love them so much?
All right, so I finally figured out how I started in miniatures. And my sister was supposed to help me remember this, but she couldn't remember. But I took a trip to Disneyland in California when I was about 20 years old. And in addition to going to Disneyland, which I learned a lot later, that Walt Disney was very much into miniatures. And I think I saw miniatures in the shops there. We went to Knott's Berry Farm. And if anybody who's my age or older remembers, Knott's Berry Farm, which is very close, or was very close to Disneyland in California, had a miniature shop. And that miniature shop continued online for years. And I bought my first miniature there. And right after that, I went to, I did field work, archaeology field work in France, and I went to London at the same time, and I had somehow heard about Queen Mary's dollhouse. So in the 1970s, I went to see Queen Mary's dollhouse. And I went there, and I went to Limoges in France and bought some Limoges miniatures, and we went to Germany, and there are miniatures everywhere. So in the 70s, I was doing this, and I went to my first miniature show in Connecticut. And this was one of the first miniatures I ever bought.
It's like a crystal, like a punch bowl.
A punch bowl,
Love it.
and I still have the 4 cups and the ladle, and I have the name of the artist, which I couldn't find.
Is that glass?
Yes, I don't know. It's
Sorry.
glass, and it's hand blown, and it's just gorgeous. Okay, so that was my first miniature, and then I can't account for the 80s or 90s like a lot of people, but I wasn't doing miniature. I was doing a lot of photography and a lot of other kinds of art, but I wasn't doing miniatures. And why I got back into it, I'm not quite sure, but I got into it, you know, very actively when we came to Philadelphia and my son and I came, and I had always heard about the Philadelphia Flower Show. So we were here looking for a school for him, because we were moving here. And so I said, let's go to the Philadelphia Flower Show. And one of the big things there was the miniature settings.
Right.
which at that time, now this is, 2005, 4, I don't know, I don't remember when it was. At that time, it was the premier way to exhibit your miniatures, and they were just gorgeous. I mean, they had like nothing I had ever seen. So I always wanted to do those miniatures, and I couldn't get in because they had the same people coming over and over again. Well, one year, I think it was about 2011, I had put my name in and I said, I'm happy to be a substitute. Somebody drops out at the last minute. And that January, so if you remember, the flower show was in February, at March that time. I got a call January 1st. Are you willing to make a miniature setting for the flower show? I said, yeah, sure. Oh, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I did. That was my first one, and I did it for 5 years after that.
So
And
you didn't grow up in a traditional dollhouse,
no,
toys. It wasn't until much later on that you sort of had this discovery.
right, right. And it really did start at Disneyland, because Disneyland is the miniature world.
Right.
And as I said, years later, I found out that Walt Disney collected miniatures and I loved all the miniature scenes that he had all over Disneyland. And I ended up writing a book about him.
Oh,
And one of the chapters in my book is about Walt Disney's interest in miniatures. So I'll actually give you the link. I have that chapter posted for free online, and people can download it and see how committed he was to take the real world and miniaturize it so everybody could experience it. And that's part of my philosophy of miniatures. I'm very interested in the idea of world making, which is what Walt Disney did, which is, I'm not interested in sort of, I have to be careful how I say this, but I'm interested in miniaturists as makers, as people who create worlds that they invite you into, and then you get to experience their vision of that world.
And that very much is behind your thinking when you created Rear Window for the Philadelphia Flower Show. So,
Right.
So what year was this that you actually entered and created the piece for the Philadelphia Flower Show, your first year?
My first year was 2011.
And was it Rear Window your first piece?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Rear Window was my last piece.
Oh, the last piece.
Yeah, so the first piece was Jules Verne's Steampunk Garden. And the theme was Paris. And I said, I'm not going to do Paris. And I'm just going to do something. And I was very into steampunk at the time. So I made this really fun steampunk garden and an office of Jules Verne's and so on. So that was cool.
Just describe a little bit about the parameters behind the Philadelphia Flower Show and the entries of the miniatures, because it's not only about 1/12 scale or scale, it's combination of real live flowers and the miniatures themselves, correct?
Right. You'll see a slide as we go along a little bit later of a Hawaiian museum. So one year the theme was Hawaii, and I made the Hawaiian Museum of Plant Lore. And so all the plants in all of my miniatures for the flower show are things I grew myself. So I'm very proud of my ability to miniaturize plants, even plants that normally are very large, full size. So all of the miniatures in the flower show have parameters in the sense of they were between 32 and 36 inches wide, 24 inches deep, and about 40 inches high, and they're displayed in a box.
So the piece actually is really that big. And if I can, I'll just go to the next. I'll
go to the next
slide, which is actually a head-on shot of the Rear Window itself. Piece.
Right, and so actually, if you go on to one of my blogs about the flower show, Rear Window was several inches taller, and I had to cut it off because I couldn't fit it in my car.
So
but
two things I just want to tell the folks is that we're going to open up the chat. You can ask questions at any point. We'll go back and answer them as we go along. So please feel free to ask questions now. And also at the end, we're going to provide you with links to all of the things that Louise is talking about in terms of finding her work. So don't worry about writing anything down right now in terms of how to find her work. Sorry.
Yeah.
Rear Window.
Perfect. And so the idea in the flower show, at least when I was exhibiting in it, was to create a scene. It had to have at least 8 live miniature plants, and they had to be to scale. So the scale is 1 foot to 1 inch, or 1/12. And Rear Window, this is my last scene. This took a year to create. And my friend Ron Hess made the staircases and fire escapes. I always have to say that. That's the one thing I didn't make on this.
Just so people know, and I'm sure they all do, what is Rear Window?
Oh, okay. So
no.
Rear Window is one of Alfred Hitchcock's masterpiece movies. And it was a set. It's not a real place. It's a set that he actually built, the biggest studio set ever built. So what was fun for me was to make a miniature version of that. And actually it is what we call selectively compressed, because it's not as tall and not as wide, scale-wise, as the set that Hitchcock built. But the concept behind the movie is that in each window you see a story being played out. And the movie moves from story to story, and they're all connected somehow. And you know, it's a murder mystery, so part of the connection is you need to figure out what the connection is. So I put in each window that you can see that's open, and a couple of them are closed, some iconic elements of the characters who are in that scene. And so here's part of the murder scene. So if you look at all these carefully, there's really fun stuff. So in the background is the metal case that the murderer chopped up his wife and put her body in, and he carries out back and forth. And there's an old chair, but there's his wife's purse and a gold wedding ring. And that's the key, that's the clue that he actually murdered his wife. And throughout Rear Window, and in fact, the Hawaiian Museum, which is also a murder scene. And you can talk later about why I do that.
That's another episode.
Well, the thing about murder scenes is they tell a story.
Right.
And also there's those wonderful nutshell dioramas done in the 30s about, you know, teaching forensic the forensic scientists through miniatures, which are so cool. But anyway, so this is one of the windows. Does it click to another one of the windows? I can't remember what comes next. Yeah. So here is Miss Lonely Hearts, who is contemplating suicide during this, all this other stuff is going on. So there's a bottle of pills that are spilled out on the counter, and she's boozing it up and so on. And the only mistake I think I made in Rear Window was I didn't get the color of her pills correctly, even though I watched the movie like 40 times. 40 times. But anyway, so you look in and I mean, for me, her story is so heartbreaking. And is there another one of her dinner scene? Yeah, well, you can see down into Miss Lonely Heart. So on the lower right, you just saw her bedroom, but on the left, she always has dinner set for 2, hoping she has a beau who comes. And what you're seeing here is the live plant version. Of course, after bringing it home, I had to change it to artificial plants. But up in the upper right is the murder scene bedroom, where the murderer has wrapped up the mattress and put her head in a hat box. It was fun. And the fun part was that year I stood there and talked to people endlessly about the scene, because people love this movie.
Yeah.
And it epitomizes my whole philosophy, which is, if you make a miniature, it should be about a story, so that you put elements into your scenes that are hints or keys or clues to what your story is, but you don't tell the whole story, so that people have a way to enter your world and try to figure out what's going on. So that's I think one of the reasons why murder scenes are so cool for miniatures.
But it's almost like the film that Alfred Hitchcock created ties in with what you created in miniature, and it just all works similarly.
Yeah, and that's about making choices when you decide to do a miniature. I mean, how many more Victorian, living rooms do we need to see?
All right, no hate mail on the Victorian. We love the Victorian.
You didn't let me finish. Yeah. if in that Victorian living room, you
Right.
drop some hints that somebody had just been there,
Right.
or something happened and you can't quite explain it. So I don't like making things pristine, partly because I'm not that good. So all of my stuff is like kind of messy, but I mean, you could see in this picture, I did all the brick is all plastic,
Okay.
and then it's got the grout put in, and then layers and layers of paint, and all of the window shades are like broken and falling apart. So I'm not very good at doing the beautiful pristine stuff that I admire so much that other miniaturists do, but I'm good at this. I'm making, like, you know, aged and messy scenes. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's part of the composition. So, it's okay that it's messy. It's okay that it's a little disjointed because that's what it's supposed to be.
right, right. What's next on our,
So,
there
yeah.
we go. So here's another flower show entry, and it's to 2013, I think. And the theme that year was England. And I said, I'm doing Harry Potter, no matter what. So this is a greenhouse that shows up in the second Harry Potter book and movie. And it's Professor Sprout's greenhouse. And when I do Harry Potter cosplay, which I did for many years, I was Professor Sprout because she's a gardener, of course, and she teaches herbology. And there she is on the left-hand side. I made a miniature figure. This is when it was all live plants, and the plants are taken from the book, so the names of the plants and everything. But the interesting thing about this is laser cut. So I learned how to do laser cutting. This was before I had my own machine. And so in order to make a greenhouse, you have to be very precise. So all of the walls of the greenhouse and all of the planters and so on are laser cut. And it's one of the wonderful tools for miniaturists, not just for making furniture and structures, but for making objects. And I mean, it just opens up the world in terms of what you can do.
We're going to talk about the techniques that you use to create your miniatures, but I just want to take a second to acknowledge that, to put this piece together, not only did you need to know how to work in miniature, in scale, and scale reproduction, but you also had to be able to work in miniature plants and create your own plants, which is a whole nother whoosh.
Yeah.
That. So
Yeah.
what's one of the biggest challenges for you putting this together?
Well, this one was because Harry Potter fans are rabid about their knowledge. I had to find miniature plants that matched the plants that were in the book. And you could see I laser cut labels there. Wait a minute, I thought here, oh, look at. So I laser cut these.
Ah.
There we go. So they're the names of the plants. It's backwards, obviously. A fan of Harry Potter could come in and say, ah, yes, that looks like that plant from Harry Potter. So that was a hard part. But also making it look like a greenhouse. It has to be filled with plants, not just a few here or there. So that was, and making it dirty. So the floor is really dirty and dinged up and so on. And
what is the size? It's hard to tell what the scale, this is 12 scale, but this is a huge piece.
This is not that big. I actually still have it. It's about 30 inches wide and 22 inches deep, or maybe 20 inches deep, because it originally had a box around it so that it had hallways on the outside and fancy lighting.
Right.
I had to get rid of all that. So it's in the interior is not all that big, but and if you go to the next slide, there's an office on the right-hand side. Yeah, this is one of the ones I'm proudest of because it's Professor Sprout's office, but this is totally made up out of my imagination. And she has a desk there with all the things she would be working on, and a tapestry on the wall and so on. And she's a Hufflepuff, so she has a Hufflepuff sign. But just one of the things I like about the miniatures I do is just loading stuff into it as you would in real life. And for me, the the way to judge a miniature, like you had last week, you had Jimmy's work where you photographed it and it looks real. That's my criteria for my work is, can I photograph it and people say, is that a real place?
Right.
Or, you know, or is it a miniature? So this one has all sorts of wonderful stuff and magical things in that I absolutely love, including I stuck in a little Venus of Willendorf who, you know, she doesn't belong there, but she's pretty cool.
I mean, even though you're replicating, it's got a whims. It's got, you feel the whimsy of it in miniature, which is not always easy to do.
Right, right.
You could replicate perfectly, but you're not going to get that whimsical feeling. Yeah, it's lovely.
And this doesn't actually exist in either the books or the movies. So one of my, yeah, I just made this up. And one of the things I'm interested in is making scenes from the Harry Potter books that never show up visually anywhere. And so I'm making the Hufflepuff common room, which never, ever, ever shows up anywhere and doesn't get described except years later by J.K. Rowling. So that's kind of fun. And that's about half done.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, go to the next one.
Oh, and yeah, this is one of the miniature books that's in Professor Sprout's office. I've been for about 2 years now researching books of magic. I mean, real books of magic from the 16th, 17th century and printing pages from them.
Wow.
And I'm getting ready to make miniature bound books, bound in leather, because I've learned the technique. And so I'm so excited about that as one of my next projects. And Darren, you remember, you and I went to see the book, the Grolier Club.
Yeah.
Exhibit of miniature books, and it's, to me, it's one of the most wonderful things.
Definitely.
Okay, the birds.
The birds.
You can tell I'm a Hitchcock fan, right? So the year before the flower show had the movies as a theme, they had the masters, and so to me, one of the master crafts people of the movies was Alfred Hitchcock. So I did Annie's house in the birds, and Annie is a woman who eventually gets murdered by the birds, and she's the school teacher, and she lives next door to the school and a playground. And on the right hand side there you can see the iconic image from the scene, which is the bird sitting on the jungle gym. This is where I learned to do 3D printing, because I priced a bird, you know, okay, think about the birds. You need hundreds of birds to make a scene. And I priced the birds in at like between $10 and $30 a bird. I was not going to do that. So I learned how to do 3D printing. I bought a 3D printer, learned how to do it, and I printed all these birds. Here's one of them, still have. So I had to take models that I, you know, downloaded on the computer and adjust them in different ways. And then I found out that there are no jungle gyms that size. So I had to make the jungle gym as well. And this picture actually is from not the Philadelphia Flower Show, although the birds was in that, but several of us got to take 2 of our displays to Singapore. And so this is the version of the birds that was in Singapore. So we transported all of our stuff over there. They gave us miniature plants, which are just gorgeous. You can see them in the foreground. And we had to rebuild our models there. And so this is my birds version of, my Singapore version of the birds. And Harry Potter was the other miniature that I took over.
We do have a question in the chat box from Ina. She wants to know, what percentage of elements in your work do you make yourself versus those that you curate?
Okay. I would say I make about 80%. So if you look at this scene in particular, I didn't make the door or the windows, but I made the whole structure. I made the fence. Stick by stick. I made the mailbox. But for example, there's a beautiful red Angora sweater in the back. I didn't make that. So when I find things that I really, really love, I'll buy them and include them in my scenes. But most of what's in my scenes structurally, I make myself.
Yeah.
So, you know, and it depends on the scenes. The Rear Window, I made pretty much everything. I mean, I made the windows and I made the curtains and the shades and so on.
So
So,
I have a question because you talked about laser cutting, you talked about 3D printing, you talked about incorporating these new technologies in your work.
yeah.
Some out of necessity, right? Because you want to purchase through hundreds of birds. But I wonder, you know, in your observation, what how you think these technologies have changed the miniatures world at all? What do you do? Like, you work in all these mediums, you make your stuff from hand, like the fence, but you also made the birds by 3D. How has this made your life easier? How do you think it's changed the miniature world?
Yeah, two good questions. And I'm going to talk about myself first, and then I'm going to talk about the miniature world, because I think that's really important. So first, what I love to do when I make a miniature is do the research and then figure out, do problem solving. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get this done? And that's when where the new technology has really helped me, because I don't want to be inhibited in what I do because I can't make something, right? And I'm not a skilled artist. I mean, I never took art training at all. But what I like about miniatures is you have to do everything. You have to be a carpenter, you have to be a builder, you have to be a painter, you have to do, and you have to do plants. You have to do all those things. So that's one of the appeals of miniatures to me is, I don't think I would be good at any one art form, but I like combining all these together. Okay, so for me, the tools are just another way to get my ideas out in a physical form and then just share them as a world with other people.
Mm.
What it has done to the miniature world, however, is not always positive, because you see now, and I buy some of these, you see a lot of kits that are laser cut, but you don't get the beauty of something that's totally handmade.
Mm.
So the kits allow people who don't have the skills, like me, to make things that they normally wouldn't be able to make. And I have collected some things from artisans that I really, really love that I could never do. And if they were a kit, I wouldn't value it as much.
Right.
So I commissioned someone to make an invention that a woman made at the 1876 World's Fair. And it is the most exquisite thing I have ever seen. I couldn't do it. If it were 3D printed, it would be worthless. But because everything is hand carved and it's just gorgeous. So there's a place for both. And in some ways, all this technology will help us value more the people who can make these exquisite things by hand. And I hope that's what happens.
Yeah.
I hope we don't replace all of like furniture making and things like that with, you know, laser cut stuff, because laser cut stuff is not always great.
And I think there are examples of that in the real world of, you know, there's old world furniture that's all handcrafted and carved, and that will always have a great value. And then you have IKEA, but you'll always have a value to something that's handcrafted, but there's a place for IKEA too.
Yeah, looking back, that's all IKEA.
Here we go. We're going to talk about that studio. All right. So do you want to talk a little bit more about your piece here?
Yeah, so this is the miniature, the Hawaiian Museum. And I just wanted to show this. These are miniature plants that I grew myself. I mean, I purchase some plants from places that grow miniature plants, but a lot of these are propagated myself from little pieces of plants. And I just love doing the miniature plants. Unfortunately, I don't have a place to show them now, but I still grow them. I have a whole garage full of miniature plants. So, but this was cool. This was the Hawaiian Museum, and it was all about plants. There's the scene from the birds. Yeah, we just put in different order. So that's the one that got replicated pretty well, I think. I mean, I think it evoked the horror of this scene, which is a great, great movie scene.
And I think this is a great example of how using technology allows you to create something that you might not have been able to do on your own, or was
Right.
too time consuming, too cumbersome, too expensive. But the payoff is just as amazing. I mean, this is an incredible piece of that diorama.
Well, and the funny thing is, I think on the I write several blogs, miniature blogs, and when I was doing the miniatures, I would always follow my progress. And you should see the messy stuff I had when I was trying to do this. And I think it's all up there on the blog. I'm willing to show my failures because I think that's a way that people can see that we're not really special people. We just try really hard, and eventually you can get something cool done. So
Yeah, for sure.
um,
For sure. This is another example of your 3D work. I love it.
yeah. So this is more recent. This was for a goddess show at the Belmar Arts Center here in New Jersey. And I wanted to make the Great Goddess Bar and Grill. And the idea is, what would happen if all the great goddesses from all the cultures through all time got together? Well, first thing they'd do is they'd go to a bar and they'd, drink themselves crazy. So this is one of my favorite things just because I love doing the research, as I said before. I had to research goddesses in about 50 different cultures. Then I had to find models for them, which I did online. There are several 3D printing sites that let you download models. Then I had to research what they would look like.
Right.
And they're all painted sort of accurately, as accurately as you can for ancient models. So this is the bartender, and she's got, several arms, but they are, and then I had a book in front that identified each goddess and where she was from and what power she had and so on. So it was really pretty cool.
So talk a little bit about how you actually discovered a whole site with these schematics that you were able to draw from.
Yeah.
And then we had a question in the chat box about what kind of a 3D printer you use. And I know there's an image of it coming up, right?
Yeah. In fact, it may be the next image.
Oh, maybe. Yeah. Ah, there it is.
Yeah. This is a really old printer called a MakerBot Replicator 2. And as much as I love what it helped me do, this is the jungle gym from the birds. It really is old, but so don't buy this one. Actually, you can't buy this anymore. But it almost doesn't matter at this point what 3D printer you get because they're all really pretty good, and you can get them for, I don't want to tell you how much this costs, but you can get them for $300 now. You go to Staples or Amazon, anywhere, and there are all sorts of machines out now. There's also something out now called a resin printer, which I bought and I'm afraid to use. So it's in my garage someday. And it does really, really fine miniatures in plastic. So in these miniatures on this kind of printer, you see the lines, the layers of plastic, but in the resin printer, you don't. So eventually one day I'll do that. But
talk a little bit, and we don't have images of some of the other mediums that you work in, but can you talk a little bit about what other mediums you dive into? I know there's obviously diorama that you work in. What are some of the other things that you do?
Okay, so I like to combine some of the other things I do with miniatures. So can we switch? Okay, let's finish with the slides. Yeah, let's go here because then I could, show the stuff I'm working on right now.
Okay.
So this is a scene I'm working on now, and I've been researching it for about a year, and I love this scene from the movie Practical Magic. And a lot of women out there I know love this movie. So, but this is the conservatory. This is where the witches who live in this house grow the magical plants and make their potions and so on. So, and where you see lots of scenes with Aidan Quinn, who's so gorgeous in this movie. I digress.
So, that's okay.
So this is one of the views. Go to the next two views and then we'll cut. Yeah, so this is another view of the conservatory, which you can see has shelves and walls with glass in them, just like a greenhouse, but it's more of a conservatory. And then the last one is one of the scenes from the movie when one of the little girls is making a potion. Okay, so Darren, go to a full screen of us and then I'll show you what I'm working on with this.
Hold on. I'm gonna make you.
Make me magical.
Wait, so
Just close down the screen sharing and you'll see me and you.
oh, okay. That's great.
There we go. So I'm working on that scene and here it is back here.
Oh.
And I'm blocking out the space with these tables. That's not what's going in there. But you can see that I've already laser cut the walls. So I'm going to bring that closer. So somebody had the question of how much do you do yourself as opposed to combining it. So this is a laser cut wall. And the way I did this was I looked at the movie endlessly, obviously, and the still images and figured out the dimensions of the walls and then designed it in a computer program and then laser cut it. And then the door is a purchase door, but I'm embellishing all of it, obviously, with woodwork and so on. And so that's how that works.
Louise, what program is that you work in to do?
I work in Adobe Illustrator.
Got it.
So, but you can work in any number of programs. Okay. So I'll just put that down. So if you go on to some of these 3D sites that I'm talking about, there are all sorts of models, both for laser cutting and 3D printing that you can use. So here's a gorgeous window.
Really gorgeous.
Yeah, I laser cut actually for Cindy's display for the flower show. I lent her one of these that we laser cut, and that's not my design though.
And it did for a show, or this is you're doing this for yourself?
No, this one, the Practical Magic.
Yeah.
I'm doing it for myself now since I don't have a place to display it at the moment, but this is one I've always wanted to do. So
beautiful.
And so it'll have some of I'm making all the jars that are in a magical conservatory have real plant materials in them, which is really fun.
That's great.
So, I mean, you don't do this unless you're passionate about it and you feel that making a world that you want to share with other people is worthwhile.
Right.
Eventually I'll find a place to display it, but I just feel like I need to do that. All right, I'll show you a couple of other things. So this building that I'm in right now is on a property that had on it in 1876 a hotel like this. And that hotel was the Colorado Kansas building from the 1876 World's Fair, which I study as an academic. So 2 years ago, I had an apprentice and he and I started building that building.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I hate working in this scale, so it hasn't gotten done. But you can see like the little windows are purchased, and there's fish scale stuff on the. This is a hard scale to work in. I appreciate people who do railroad scale, like I never did before. But in that building at the World's Fair was this display by one of the first women taxidermists.
Huh.
She killed and created all of those animals in the display. So that's one of my projects now. And this is the woman, Mrs. Maxwell. She's a hoot. And so I'm making her as well. So I'm making her display.
So wait, so you're going to create all the animals, the taxidermy?
Yeah, well, I've been buying them. Yeah, I'm going to go kill real animals and shrink them. I've been buying, plastic versions of them and will be finding ways to make them look more realistic. But here's Mrs. Maxwell, you know, before she gets created. And a couple years ago at Philadelphia Miniaturia, I went to some people and they helped me find fabulous, you know, accessories. So again, that answers the question. You could spend your time making these things, or you could spend your time making a story and making a scene. It's hard to do both. It's hard to make for me, it's hard to make every single thing. But one of the things I want to show people is when I do a display, I make a project book. So this is the big one for Rear Window, and it has in it every, that way?
Right, yep, no, we can see it.
Hold on. So every, let's find a good picture. Here we go. So it has all the details of every scene. Every single project I work on. This one actually had architectural plans that I found in a book about Hitchcock's architecture. So as I said before, I love doing the research, and that is something I do for everyone. So I have one for Mrs. Maxwell, and for Practical Magic has one. And you know, a dozen other projects that I want to do. I always have a lot of ideas for projects. I never have any problem.
Well, that's the thing. You work in so many different mediums. There's diorama, there's photography also you work in.
Yeah, miniature photography, which you can see on one of my sites. Okay, here's a wacky thing I'm doing now. So I love old photography, and it occurred, and these are called cabinet cards, which are photographs, studio photographs people would have done in the late 19th, early 20th century. And it occurred to me that these cabinet cards show people in exactly our scale. So I decided to start adding miniatures. I'm going to put the light on.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, started adding miniatures because I like to do wacky stuff. So here's another one. And
so does that sort of fall in the assemblage? Where is that?
Yeah, these are assemblages that there's no reason for them other than I just find them funny.
That's the artist in you.
Yeah, and I think people, I used to collect these as a sort of sacred thing. Oh my God, early photography, we need to save them. And it's like, come on.
Right.
Now I get them on eBay for $1 each. So this is my favorite though.
Oh, fantastic.
So, well, it goes back to my philosophy of miniatures, which is if you see the world in terms of the miniatures that are all around you, because any art pretty much miniaturizes the world, right? Unless you're talking about people doing really, really large scale stuff. So everybody miniaturizes the world. And the power of having something in a small form that you can either hide or you can share with someone that you wouldn't be able to share in full scale is just really important to me. I'm doing a project now on old romance comics from the 1950s and 60s. It's like, don't ask why. And I'm combining them with miniatures. So this is Crying Towels. So it's a cabinet, a miniature cabinet, perfectly scaled. And most of the romance comics have women who are crying. You may be familiar with them from the Liechtenstein images. And so I take these images and they have stories. They all have stories attached to them. This one says, sob, oh Gordy, why didn't you try to understand? I couldn't help myself, sob. So, and I have dozens of those. So that's what I'm working on. That's, you know, apart from traditional miniatures, which is some of the other things. And I also do a lot of miniature photography, which you can see up on my website. We're not going to look at those now. And yeah, just, you got to keep going. You can, especially during this time. I mean, the art is what's keeping us sane.
Yeah. No, I'm so excited to see the studio space behind you. And it just, tell us what, I mean, aside from the technologies that you use, what are your favorite handheld tools that you use? Like what can you not live without?
I can't live without this.
Wood cutter.
Yeah, because it's got the angles. I can never figure out angles.
Right.
And you can just choppy anything. And so I'm actually using that right now to do the woodworking on that. So yeah, that's pretty much my favorite tool. I have Dremel tools also, which I can't live without. So
Yeah, I have to say, I love you. I've been to your studio space. It's incredible. It's much larger than what we're seeing behind you. You have like, there's more to it. Oh my God, there's so much. But there are rows and rows of materials, and tools.
yeah.
I love the shadow box behind you, like the old school shadow box, the printer's box.
I just took everything out of there and I put it into plastic cases because I couldn't find anything anymore. So I'll be refilling that with something, but not sure what.
We do have another question in the chat box. What are some of your favorite materials? I mean, you mentioned you love working with plants. That's real, but what about miniatures? Is it wood? What is it?
Well,
and you mentioned that you had that beautiful piece made. What is materials of that piece? Was it metal?
I think that was made of cherry and
so
a couple
wood.
of other woods. I have pieces of wood, okay, from the 1970s when I first started miniatures. Beautiful mahogany and cherry and walnut that I've never used. Like, you know, and I could use them now. I could laser cut them.
But just
but
like photographs, you need to use them.
Yeah, I will. I will.
All right, one other question, and then because we're up at 45 minutes, what is your best advice for someone who might be new to the miniature world?
So ideally, which is what I did with a couple of people, is you want to apprentice with someone, right? That is, you want someone who's an experienced miniaturist to take you under their wing and show you the wonders of doing miniatures. That's hard now because people are isolated. And also, when somebody just enters the miniature world, I take them to a miniature show. So like Philadelphia Miniaturia, which I assume will not be going on this year, but I don't know yet. Because miniature shows are where you see the passion that everyone has. You see the range of both materials and objects that people have made. And so, where are we?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay.
I brought the screen back up.
Well, actually, you might want to stop sharing that screen because, go ahead.
Sorry.
So that's what I would encourage people to do in normal times. Now, I would say go on Pinterest and go on YouTube and find every instructional video that you can find.
Awesome.
Because Pinterest is just magical for miniaturists because you have just tens of thousands of images of what people are doing. And then on YouTube, you have all sorts of wonderful techniques that you could never really learn on your own. And so since we're all in isolation, teach yourself now. And then when we can come back together, you can do things like go to a Philadelphia Miniaturia, or you can go to Castine in Maine, which is like the gold standard of miniature instruction. So every June, I assume, Darren, they didn't do it this year. I mean, I assume Castine was not.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think Castine is not happening this year.
Yeah, but just be in touch with other people, either virtually or.
Where do we sign up to be your apprentice?
On over. First, you have to finish this. You got to finish that little thing. My apprentice moved out of town, so we didn't get very far after we.
All right, so let's take one more question. Oh, a question about what is your bucket list project?
Okay. So I'm gonna look at this wall. Okay, ready? So on this wall are drawers of all the projects I want to do. Right? Okay. So one is a scene from The Wolfman, the original movie, The Wolfman, and it's the antique shop, Gwen's Antique Shop. One is the movie. One of my favorite movies is the original The Thing from 1951, I believe, where they're growing little baby Martians, basically. So it's a little plant-based thing because The Thing is a plant from Mars. So I have, and all of these things I have collected stuff to do.
Right.
I want to reproduce in tiny scale the Women's Pavilion from the 1876 Centennial Exhibition. I tried to do it in 1/12 scale and it would have taken up the size of the whole studio. So I started with going to miniature shows and buying really small, like micro miniature stuff. So eventually I'll do that. What else is over there? The movie Invaders from Mars, which has a really cool scene. Let's see what else I have. And then of course the Hufflepuff Commons room. And then there's another scene from Harry Potter that is a room filled with clocks. And so I've been collecting miniature clocks.
That is just awesome.
So never at a loss for ideas. Just don't have the time, do it all.
All right, let's take one last question. Do you have a favorite miniaturist or one who inspires you?
Yeah, where is his work? Wait. Yes, here it is. So there's a guy who used to show at miniature shows, specifically miniature Philadelphia Miniaturia, named Jim Watt. He was from London, and he made my favorite piece ever, which if you can, is this stereoscope.
That's awesome.
Is exquisite. The problem now for people like Jim Watt who do this exquisite woodworking and metalworking is that these things are being reproduced in mass, so that you can go to Michael's now, or you can go to Joann's and buy somewhat of a replica of one of these, but it's nothing like, what
that's
Jim
hand carved hardwood.
Yeah, it's
real brass. So that's the difference.
Yeah, he's my favorite. And then I have a bunch of Native American pots that I collected. This is from Isleta, but when we lived in New Mexico, we went to Acoma, and I have just a ton of miniature pots that for some reason the women of Acoma were making lots of those. So
all right, I'm gonna bring up the I was gonna bring up the screen where we can learn where to find you. So hold on while I pull up that last piece.
Sure. Oh. And I'm happy to stay around and answer the questions in the chat after we're done if people want to see, awesome, answers we may have missed or questions we may have missed.
All right, we're a little frozen now, but can you guys see this screen, or is it not shared?
It's not shared.
Okay, hold on.
Well, why don't we just send it in an email to everybody?
Yeah, we can do that. Actually, I'll put it in. I will send out a link to the repeat of this and rebroadcast, and
oh, yeah.
Who are joining us will ultimately end up on my mailing list. So, yeah.
So Donald asked the question, does my son make miniatures? No, he doesn't, but we share a studio now. So he's very into bookmaking right now. So that's, we're sharing a lot of ideas about making books, mine in miniature, his large scale. So, but no, he doesn't.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been just awesome. If there are no other questions, I don't see any other questions in the chat bar. Just lots of thank yous for you being here. This is awesome. Louise, I want to thank you for being here. This is just an incredible hour. Just spending time with you, hearing you talk about miniatures has just been so wonderful. Thank you for being here today.
You are very welcome, and I really enjoyed it.
I hope we can bring you back maybe in the fall and talk more about miniatures.
Yeah, and we can talk about doing workshops too.
We can, that's right. So stay tuned for more, folks. Join us. We actually have another Zoominar scheduled for next Saturday, this time at 4 o'clock Eastern. So I hope you can join us there. And again, thank you, Louise, for everything and for being here this time. And we really, really enjoyed having you.
Okay, thanks, Darren.
All right, thanks. Bye, guys.